Heimskringla, or The Chronicle of the Kings of Norway by Snorri Sturlson. Originally written in Old Norse approximately in 1225 Anno Domini by the poet and historian Snorri Sturlson. English translation by Samuel Laing, London, 1844. Narrated by Escriva. The YNGLINGA Saga, or the story of the Yngling family, from Odin to HALFDAN the Black. Of the situation of countries. It is said that the Earth's circle, which the human race inhabits, is torn across into many bites, so that great seas run into the land from the out ocean. Thus, it is known that a great sea goes in a Narvasund, and up to the land of Jerusalem. From the same sea, a long sea bight stretches towards the northeast, and is called the Black Sea, and divides the three parts of the earth, of which the eastern part is called Asia, and the western is called by some Europa, by some Enea. Northward of the Black Sea lies Svitjod the Great, or the Cold. The Great Svitjod is reckoned by some as not less than the Great Serkland. Others compare it to the Great Blue Land. The northern part of Svitjod lies uninhabited on account of frost and cold, as likewise the southern parts of Blue Land are waste from the burning of the sun. In Svitjod are many great domains, and many races of men, and many kinds of languages. There are giants, and there are dwarfs, and there are also blue men, and there are any kinds of stranger creatures. There are huge wild beasts and dreadful dragons. On the south side of the mountains, which lie outside of all inhabited lands, runs a river through Svitjod, which is properly called by the name of Tanai, but was formerly called Tanakissel or Vanakissel, and which falls into the Black Sea. The country of the people on the Vanakissel was called Vanaland or Vanaheim, and the river separates the three parts of the world, of which the easternmost part is called Asia, and the westernmost Europe. Of the people of Asia. The country east of the Tanakissel in Asia was called Asaland or Asaheim, and the chief city in that land was called Asgard. In that city was a chief called Odin, and it was a great place for sacrifice. It was the custom there that 12 temple priests should both direct the sacrifices and also judge the people. They were called Diar or Drotner, and all the people served and obeyed them. Odin was a great and very far-traveled warrior who conquered many kingdoms, and so successful was he that in every battle the victory was on his side. It was the belief of his people that victory belonged to him in every battle. It was his custom when he sent his men into battle or on any expedition that he first laid his hand upon their heads and called down a blessing upon them, and then they believed their undertaking would be successful. His people also were accustomed, whenever they fell into danger by land or sea, to call upon his name, and they thought that always they got comfort and aid by it, for where he was, they thought help was near. Often he went away so far that he passed many seasons on his journeys. Of Odin's brothers. Odin had two brothers, the one called We, the other Vilje, and they governed the kingdom when he was absent, It happened once, when Odin had gone to a great distance and had been so long away that the people of Asia doubted if he would ever return home, that his two brothers took it upon themselves to divide his estate, but both of them took his wife Frigg to themselves. Odin soon after returned home and took his wife back. Of Odin's war with the people of Vanaland. Odin went out with a great army against the Vanaland people, but they were well prepared and defended their land, so that victory was changeable, and they ravaged the lands of each other and did great damage. They tired of this at last, and on both sides appointed a meeting for establishing peace, made a truce, and exchanged hostages. The Vanaland people sent their best man, Njord the Rich, and his son Frey. The people of Asaland sent a man called Hone, whom they thought well suited to be a chief, as he was a stout and very handsome man. And with him they sent a man of great understanding called Mime. On the other side, the Vanaland people sent the wisest man in their community, who was called Quase. Now, when Hone came to Vanaheim, he was immediately made a chief, and Mime came to him with good counsel on all occasions. But when Hone stood in the things or other meetings, if Mime was not near him, and any difficult matter was laid before him, he always answered in one way: "Now let others give their advice," so that the Vanaland people got a suspicion that the Asaland people had deceived them in the exchange of men. They took Mime, therefore, and beheaded him, and sent his head to the Asaland people. Odin took the head, smeared it with herbs, so that it should not rot, and sang incantations over it. Thereby he gave it the power that it spoke to him, and discovered to him many secrets. Odin placed Njord and Frey as priests of the sacrifices, and they became Diar of the Asaland people. Njord's daughter Freya was priestess of the sacrifices, and first taught the Asaland people the magic art, as it was in use and fashion among the Vanaland people. While Njord was with the Vanaland people, he had taken his own sister in marriage, for that was allowed by their law, and their children were Frey and Freya. But among the Asaland people, it was forbidden to intermarry with such near relations. Odin divides his kingdom, also concerning Gefjon. There goes a great mountain barrier from northeast to southwest, which divides the greater Svitjod from other kingdoms. South of this mountain ridge, it is not far to Turkland, where Odin had great possessions. In those times, the Roman chiefs went wide around in the world, subduing to themselves all people, and on this account many chiefs fled from their domains. But Odin, having foreknowledge and magic sight, knew that his posterity would come to settle and dwell in the northern half of the world. He therefore set his brothers Ve and Vilje over Asgard, and he himself, with all the gods and a great many other people, wandered out, first westward to Gardarike, and then south to Saxland. He had many sons, and after having subdued an extensive kingdom in Saxland, he set his sons to rule the country. He himself went northwards to the sea, and took up his abode in an island which is called Odin's Infien. Then he sent Gefjon across the sound to the north to discover new countries, and she came to King Gilve, who gave her a ploughgate of land. Then she went to Jotunheim and bore 4 sons to a giant and transformed them into a yoke of oxen. She yoked them to a plough and broke out the land into the ocean right opposite to Odin's. This land was called Sealand, and there she afterwards settled and dwelt. Skjold, a son of Odin, married her, and they dwelt at Leire. Where the ploughed land was is a lake or sea called Lage. In the Swedish land, the fjords of Lage correspond to the Nesses in Sealand. Brage the Old sings thus of it. Gefion from Gilve drove away to add new land to Denmark's sway. Blithe Gefion plucking in the smoke that steamed up from her oxen yoke. 4 heads, 8 forehead stars had they, bright gleaming, and she plowed away, dragging new lands from the deep main to join them to the sweet isles plain. Now, when Odin heard that things were in a prosperous condition in the land to the east beside Gilve, he went thither, and Gilve made a peace with him. For Gilve thought he had no strength to oppose the people of Assaland. Odin and Gilve had many tricks and enchantments against each other, but the Assaland people had always the superiority. Odin took up his residence at the Malare Lake, at the place now called Old Sigtun. There he erected a large temple, where there were sacrifices according to the customs of the Assaland people. He appropriated to himself the whole of that district and called it Sigtun. To the temple priests he gave also domains. Njord dwelt in Noatun, Frey in Uppsal, Heimdall in the Himinbergs, Thor in Trudvang, Balder in Breidablik. To all of them he gave good estates. Of Odin's accomplishments. When Odin of Vasaland came to the north, and the Diar with him, they introduced and taught to others the arts which the people long afterwards have practiced. Odin was the cleverest of all, and from him all the others learned their arts and accomplishments. And he knew them first, and knew many more than other people. But now, to tell why he is held in such high respect, we must mention various causes that contributed to it. When sitting among his friends, his countenance was so beautiful and dignified that the spirits of all were exhilarated by it. But when he was in war, he appeared dreadful to his foes. This arose from his being able to change his skin and form in any way he liked. Another cause was that he conversed so cleverly and smoothly that all who heard believed him. He spoke everything in rhyme, such as now composed, which we call skaldkraft. He and his temple priests were called songsmiths, for from them came that art of song into the northern countries. Odin could make his enemies in battle blind, or deaf, or terror-struck, and their weapons so blunt that they could no more but than a willow wand. On the other hand, his men rushed forwards without armor, were as mad as dogs or wolves, bit their shields, and were strong as bears or wild bulls, and killed people at a blow. But neither fire nor iron told upon themselves. These were called berserker. Of Odin's feats, Odin could transform his shape. His body would lie as if dead or asleep, but then he would be in shape of a fish, or worm, or bird, or beast, and be off in a twinkling to distant lands upon his own or other people's business. With words alone he could quench fire, still the ocean in tempest, and turn the wind to any quarter he pleased. Odin had a ship which was called Skidbladnir, in which he sailed over wide seas, and which he could draw up like a cloth. Odin carried with him Mimir's head, which told him all the news of other countries. Sometimes even he called the dead out of the earth, or set himself beside the burial mounds. Once he was called the Ghost Sovereign and Lord of the Moons. He had 2 ravens to whom he had taught the speech of man, and they flew far and wide through the land and brought him the news. In all such things he was preeminently wise. He taught all these arts in runes and songs which are called incantations, and therefore the Aslan people are called incantation smiths. Odin understood also the art in which the greatest power is lodged, and which he himself practiced, namely what is called magic. By means of this, he could know beforehand the predestined fate of men, of their not yet completed lot, and also bring on the death, ill luck, or bad health of people, and take the strength or wit from one person and give it to another. But after such witchcraft followed such weakness and anxiety that it was not thought respectable for man to practice it, and therefore the priestesses were brought up in this art. Odin knew finally where all missing cattle were concealed under the earth, and understood the songs by which the earth, the hills, the stones, and mounds were opened to him, and he bound those who dwell in them by the power of his word, and went in and took what he pleased. From these arts he became very celebrated. His enemies dreaded him. His friends put their trust in him and relied on his power and on himself. He taught the most of his arts to his priests of the sacrifices, and they came nearest to himself in all wisdom and witch knowledge. Many others, however, occupied themselves much with it, and from that time witchcraft spread far and wide, and continued long. People sacrificed to Odin and the 12 chiefs from Asaland, and called them their gods, and believed in them long after. From Odin's name came the name Odin, which people gave to his sons. And from Thor's name comes Thore, also Thorarin, and also it is sometimes compounded with other names, as Steintor or Hoftor, or even altered in other ways. Odin's law giving. Odin established the same law in his land that had been in force in Asaland. Thus he established by law that all dead men should be burned, and their belongings laid with them upon the pile, and the ashes be cast into the sea or buried in the earth. Thus, said he, every one will come to Valhalla with the riches he had with him upon the pile, and he would also enjoy whatever he himself had buried in the earth. For men of consequence, a mound should be raised to their memory, and for all other warriors who had been distinguished for manhood, a standing stone, which custom remained long after Odin's time. On winter day, there should be blood sacrifice for a good year, and in the middle of winter for a good crop, and the third sacrifice should be on summer day for victory in battle. Over all Svitjud, the people paid Odin a scat or tax, so much on each hand, but he had to defend the country from enemy or disturbance and pay the expense of the sacrifice feasts for a good year. Of Njord's marriage. Njord took a wife called Skade, but she would not live with him and married afterwards Odin, and had many sons by him, of whom one was called Seming, and about him Eivind Skaldaspiller sings thus. To Asa's son Queen Skade bore, Seming who dyed his shield in gore, the giant queen of rock and snow, who loves to dwell on earth below, the iron pine tree's daughter. She sprung from the rocks that rib the sea, to Odin bore full many a son, heroes of many a battle won. To Seming Earl Hakon the Great reckoned back his pedigree. This Svitjud they called Mannheim, but the great Svitjud they called Godheim, and of Godheim great wonders and novelties were related. Of Odin's death. Odin died in his bed in Svitjud, and when he was near his death, he made himself be marked with the point of a spear, and said he was going to Godheim, and would give a welcome there to all his friends, and all brave warriors should be dedicated to him, and the Swedes believed that he was gone to the ancient Asgard, and would live there eternally. They began the belief in Odin and the calling upon him. The Swedes believed that he often showed to them before any great battle. To some he gave victory, others he invited to himself, and they reckoned both of these to be fortunate. Odin was burned, and at his pile there was great splendor. It was their faith that the higher the smoke arose in the air, the higher he would be raised whose pile it was, and the richer he would be, the more property that was consumed with him. Of Njord. Njord of Noatun was then the sole sovereign of the Swedes, and he continued the sacrifices, and was called the Drod or sovereign by the Swedes, and he received scat and gifts from them. In his days were peace and plenty, and such good years in all respects, that the Swedes believed Njord ruled over the growth of seasons and the prosperity of the people. In his time, all the dire or gods died, and blood sacrifices were made for them. Njord died on a bed of sickness, and before he died, made himself be marked for Odin with the spear point. The Swedes burned him, and all wept over his grave mound. Frey's death. Frey took the kingdom after Njord, and was called Drott by the Swedes, and they paid taxes to him. He was, like his father, fortunate in friends and in good seasons. Frey built a great temple at Uppsal, made it his chief seat, and gave it all his taxes, his land and goods. Then began the Uppsal domains, which have remained ever since. Then began in his days the fraud peace, and then there were good seasons in all the land, which the Swedes ascribed to Frey, so that he was more worshipped than the other gods, as the people became much richer in his days by reason of the peace and good seasons. His wife was called Gerd, daughter of Gimis, and their son was called Fjolne. Frey was called by another name, Yngve, and this name Yngve was considered long after in his race as a name of honor, so that his descendants have since been called Ynglinga. Frey fell into a sickness, and as his illness took the upper hand, his men took the plan of letting few approach him. In the meantime, they raised a great mound, in which they placed a door with 3 holes in it. Now when Frey died, they bore him secretly into the mound, but told the Swedes he was alive, and they kept watch over him for 3 years. They brought all the taxes into the mound, and through one hole they put in the gold, through the other the silver, and through the third the copper money that was paid. Peace and good seasons continued. Of Freya and her daughters. Freya alone remained of the gods, and she became on this account so celebrated that all women of distinction were called by her name, whence they now have the title Fru, so that every woman is called Fru, or mistress over her property, and the wife is called the house Fru. Freya continued the blood sacrifices. Freya had also many other names. Her husband was called Oder, and her daughters Hnos and Gerseme. They were so very beautiful that afterwards the most precious jewels were called by their names. When it became known to the Swedes that Frey was dead, and yet peace and good seasons continued, they believed that it must be so as long as Frey remained in Sweden, and therefore they would not burn his remains, but called him the god of this world, and afterwards offered continually blood sacrifices to him, principally for peace and good seasons. Of King Fjolne's death. Fjolne, Yngve Frey's son, ruled thereafter over the Swedes and the Uppsala domains. He was powerful and lucky in seasons, and in holding the peace. Frode ruled then in Leider, and between them there was great friendship and visiting. Once, when Fjolne went to Frode in Sealand, a great feast was prepared for him, and invitations to it were sent all over the country. Frode had a large house, in which there was a great vessel, many ells high, and put together of great pieces of timber, and this vessel stood in a lower room. Above it was a loft, in the floor of which was an opening through which liquor was poured into this vessel. The vessel was full of mead, which was excessively strong. In the evening Fjolne, with his attendants, was taken into the adjoining loft to sleep. In the night he went out to the gallery to seek a certain place, and he was very sleepy and exceedingly drunk. As he came back to his room, he went along the gallery to the door of another loft, went into it, and his foot slipping, he fell into the vessel of mead and was drowned. So says Theodulf of Quine. In Frode's hall the fearful word, the deaf foreboding sound was heard. The cry of fate denouncing doom was heard at night in Frode's home. And when brave Frode he found, Svitjud's chief Fjolne drowned. In Frode's mansion drowned was he, drowned in the waveless, windless sea.